Well, good evening once again, and this will be one last thing before I shut her down for the night. Um, I've got my situation with my phones and my memory in the phones all sorted out, I think, so I should be able to tell this one just in one go. um, Now this story does have a bit of a religious edge to it. But even if you're not a believer, you will get something out of it because it's really more a story about human nature than anything else. And I've told this story to non-believers before, and everybody who's heard it has been quite inspired by it. So please bear with me. Of course, as you know, I'm a believer in God. I understand that not everybody is, and I don't want to push anything on anybody, but I really do believe, and you have my word on this, that even if you're a non-believer, you will find this story enlightening. Now, when I was young, it was a long time ago now, looking at myself in this camera, I'm really seeing it. When I was young, and I was working in the wire factory and so on, after work I'd often take a drive in my car and the old Chev that I had there, and I'd listen to it. AM radio back then, and with the big clunky push buttons and everything to set the stations, and lots of chrome. Remember chrome on cars? Oh, that's what I had. I loved it. But anyway, I digress. I'll get back on track here. Nothing worse than getting me talking about old cars if you want to get me off track. And I just did it to myself. I'm alone here. I can't blame anyone else. Anyway, it does factor into the story though, because what I used to do is when I'd finish my shift at midnight in the wire factory, I'd often take a drive. And I was in high school all day, and I worked in a wire factory at night because I was on my own and I had to pay my bills. And anyway, I had this car, and I would take it out for a ride. After work, I'd often drive to the neighboring town and through the neighboring town and then back to my town again. So that's what I was doing anyway. And listening to the radio. And there was an old-time preacher who used to come on the radio on one of the American radio stations that came in really good at night. An AM radio, American radio stations really seem to work well at night with AM radio. And he was a fellow by the name of J. Vernon McGee. And I remember I heard this story thereabouts 1985. That would have been around that time that I heard it. And it inspired me then, and then I forgot about it. And then in the early 1990s, I was going through a real rough time. I'd gotten really sick. I just had a lot of trouble in my life at that time. A lot of people had turned against me. It was in my early 20s, and things were very unsettled. And it was just kind of a tough time for me in my life anyway. And I had become angry. I'd become angry and resentful because of all the stuff I had to deal with over the years, and then having people treat me the way they were treating me at that time and stuff, and then being sick on top of it. It was just all too much, I guess, and I'd become pretty angry and resentful, and I had pretty much given up on God, too. I was just kind of a hateful person at that point in my life, All I wanted to do was to lash out and to hurt people because I had been hurt, and I had this idea I was going to get payback, I guess, or something. I don't really know, but I was going to make a point and prove that I wasn't to be fooled with, I guess. But I pretty much forgotten about this sermon that I had heard years before by J. Vernon McGee. And one night I couldn't sleep. I was in a lot of pain because I was quite sick. And I got going through the radio stations. Of course, by that time, FM radio had come in. Anyway, I'm turning the knob there running the pointer back and forth, trying to find something to listen to. And of course, I wanted music. That's what I wanted to listen to. And I come across, as I was flipping through the stations, I heard a familiar voice. J. Vernon McGee had a very distinctive voice. He was an old man, and he had just a very distinctive voice, and I knew the voice right away. I thought, that's that radio preacher I used to listen to. But I had no interest in him. I didn't want to hear anything about God. So I just flipped on past that, and I found a station with some music on it, and I was listening to that. And I'm sitting there, and I felt this compulsion. It was almost like I was being pulled or drawn to turn back to J. Vernon McGee, and I didn't want to. I kept resisting it, but I really felt like I had to. And so eventually I gave in. I thought, oh, I'll just turn back there. I'll listen to that fella for a little bit, and then I'll see that there's nothing to it. That's my other phone making noises. And then I'll go back to the music that I want to listen to. So that's what I did. I went back to J. Vernon McGee. And when I went back there, just when I got back and I started to listen to him, he told this story, and it's the same story I remembered hearing years before. In fact, I'm sure it was the same broadcast. It was just a tape of it, Excuse me. Anyway, here's the story. J. Vernon McGee grew up during the Depression. His father owned a farm. His father had dairy cows. And when J. Vernon McGee, when he was a young boy, his job was to tend to his father's dairy cows. To look out for their well-being, basically, to check on them, make sure that the barn was suitable for them, and that they had enough to eat, and that there was none of them were in distress or anything. So every night he'd take the lantern, because there was no electricity out in the country on the farm back in the 1930s. So he'd take his coal oil lantern and he'd go out to the barn to check on his father's cows. Now, the barn would all be dark. It'd be all dark in there. And when he went in there with the light, with the lantern, then the light from the lantern would light up the inside of the barn. And when that would happen, all the birds that lived up in the rafters of the barn, they'd sing, because they'd think it was daylight. To them, that was the sun. It just triggered them to want to sing. So the birds up in the rafters would sing. But the rats that lived all in the hay and everything on the floor, they'd scurry into the dark corners and hide. They didn't want anything to do with the light. See, the light made the birds sing. The birds welcomed the light. They were happy for it. They were glad of it. The rats hated the light, and they ran from it. And they hid in the dark corners, and they hid in the shadows, and they avoided the light. And the thing is, the moral of that story that J. Vernon McGee told about the farm and about his dad's cows and about the birds and the rats is this. In this life, there are all different kinds of people. And it's unfortunate, but there are some people who choose the wrong path. They choose darkness. And those people hate light, because light reveals things. They don't want things revealed. If you're choosing darkness, you got secrets. You don't want things revealed. And so you'll run from any revelation of truth. You'll run from the light. Now, I know it's in a Christian context that the story was told, and I'm a believer myself. I believe in Jesus, so to me, Jesus is the light. But even if you don't believe in Jesus, you can get some good out of this story, because, the light really is the revelation of truth. And no matter who you are, you have some idea of truth, and you have some desire for it and some knowledge of it and so on. Even if you disagree with me about Jesus being the source of it, you're still aware of it. And so, and if you see in yourself that you're the kind of a person that welcomes the light and sings for it like the birds did, you welcome it and you rejoice in it the way the birds did, then you're probably on the right path for the most part. Not that anybody's perfect, but you're probably basically on the right path. But if you see that you're somebody who scurries away from the light, who fears the light, who runs from it, well, then you need to analyze yourself. You need to figure out where you've gone wrong. And we all go wrong. And back when I felt compelled to listen to that, back in the early 90s, I was going badly wrong. And anyway, that story, it made me think, it reconnected me to something that I had rejected. It reconnected me to the light. At least it started that process. And so, anyway, for that reason, I've always been really grateful to Reverend J. Vernon McGee for sharing that story. And like I say, I've told that story over the years to many people who believe in many different things, and not one of them has found that it was without value. And I hope you all find some value in it, and I feel really honored to be able to pass it on. And I just want to wish you all a good night. I say I'm not feeling very good. I got a toothache, and I'm just not feeling very good. So I'm going to put some clothes oil on my tooth, and I'm going to go to bed. But I wish you all a nice night, and I wish you all sweet dreams. Talk later.